the year before the Jesuits were officially suppressed by the Vatican and became a great tool in the hand of somebody called Napoleon.
Wow.
Then we have, of course, the Jesuits, which eventually are the ones that are behind everything in the last 500 years.
Welcome to Far Out with Faust, everybody. I am Faust Checho, in case you're just tuning in for the first time, and I am joined once again by someone who I now know is truly an OG in this game and who's been around a long time. And since our first interview, I've read a lot of his work, and he just keeps putting out incredibly important information. His name is Leo Zagami. Let me tell you a little bit about him, and then we're going to get into it. Leo is a writer and a researcher. His grandfather was a Sicilian politician who is also a known historian and author who married into aristocracy. Leo's mother, Jessica Lyon Young, is a member of the family of the Queen Mother of England. Leo Zagami, a.k.a. Leo Young, was a well-known and renowned in media and the music industry as a record producer, but gained global notoriety in 2006 because of his direct involvement and knowledge to the New World Order and the secret societies so often referred to as the Illuminati. His writings rose quickly and gained great notoriety from such people as David Icke, Alex Jones, because it's accurate, evidence-based information. And around 2009, Leo began publishing books in Europe and Japan based on a variety of subjects, from secret societies to the Vatican, Freemasonry, geopolitical matters concerning the New World Order. He's contributed and collaborated on so many books dedicated to exposing the secret world of Vatican Freemasonry, which is a whole nother separate podcast. But all of his latest books were written entirely in English, and they are not to be missed. Leo, welcome back. Thank you for being in, dude. It just takes such a big heart and giant, balls to do what you do. And I appreciate you, man. I appreciate you taking a little time out from me.
Well, it's always a pleasure. I think the last time we talked was a couple of years ago. Maybe.
Yes, it was.
And so, I mean, it's been far too long. Since then, I've been publishing a set of new books, volume 10, 11, 12, which you see behind me. And this is actually the last installment of my confession series. There will no longer be any confessions because it was a project that I built a little bit like a pyramid going all the way to the top. And so this is, as the cover shows, the all-seeing eye of this pyramid in which we finally meet the controllers of the controllers, or the controllers of the Freemasons, the think tanks, the Illuminati. So many times I had this question put through to me: who controls this? Who controls that? And ultimately, this is revealed in the last installment, which is, by the way, also a bestseller, and at the moment, my best-selling book. So it's really being appreciated, also because this book is written on facts. There is no speculative elements in it. I wanted to really try to fight any possible, reprisal from the Jesuits, who are well known as the scholars of the church, as the people who are in charge of the education of so many illustrious universities like Georgetown, Fordham, and so on. So I had to really do a good job in order to not have any problems later on. And it seems like it's really going well. And there has been, up until now, no criticism in regards to the content. They tried to say, oh, well, this is just an historic book based on historical facts that are already well known. No, this book brings you new evidence together with the historical evidence, which it's used to support eventually the claims I'm making in this book. Because, as you know, my experience in the Illuminati, in the Freemasons, for many years has put me in contact at times with the Illuminati, with their think tanks, with their lodges, with their occultists. And so I think that ultimately we can say that the New World Order is not so happy
right.
about the publication of this new book, which is actually entitled History, Secret Societies, and the Politics of the Jesuit New World Order and the Luciferian Court. So it's a pleasure to be on Far Out with Faust today to present this book and to present all my latest work, because I also published, since we last spoke, volume 11, which is another very interesting installment of my confession series based on the history of mind control. And then I also published volume 10, which is instead the secret societies and also the Islamic Freemasonry. Islamic Freemasonry is not really a well-known topic, so
no, it's not.
And it has received actually praises even from within the Muslim world, with sheikhs reviewing it online, and paradoxically, I was expecting a backlash from the Muslim world, which never came, because in the end, it was written in a way that was respectful. At the same time, it was bringing out evidence that they themselves couldn't debunk. So they came to the conclusion that even Mohammed would have probably appreciated this effort. And I was quite impressed by that.
That's amazing. And you know what? The truth is that stuff doesn't belong. And so, if they're being honest about it and they can recognize it's there, I'm sure they want to, do away with it and keep Islam as pure as it's supposed to be. So, it makes sense that a lot of them were eventually grateful for you for exposing that, because people don't ever, you rarely hear that subject come up. So that's
because
pretty awesome.
At times it seems like it's much it's more easy for a Muslim to condemn the Freemasons in league with the Zionists, the Jewish conspiracy, and all that. It kind of like, without really reflecting on the fact that many Muslims are themselves Freemasons. And so it's like a little bit, there's an element of hypocrisy, which I wanted to clear. And I think that, in fact, like you said, they have probably appreciated that.
Yeah, absolutely. And, so Freemasonry, just a side note, it's like, I understand that there is kind of a history, or I should say a legacy of what you could probably safely call racism towards certain races being involved in Freemasonry. Like, and I did hear at one point that up until recently, you weren't like no people of African blood were allowed in, but then that changed.
No, that's not really correct.
No? Okay.
They had simply their own form of Freemasonry, which was known as Prince-Hall Freemasonry, because in the last 2 centuries, what happened was that the whole history of African American Freemasonry developed separately because of segregation. A freed slave called Prince Saul founded the African Lodge and gave birth to a form of Freemasonry which only in the 90s, and thanks also to I would say the work conducted by the United Grand Lodge of England, which recognizes and it's in charge of the recognition of all the regular Grand Lodges, to push the so-called regular white lodges here in the United States to recognize their counterparts in each state. So to say that there is no Freemasonry in the African-American world would be completely erroneous, because some of the most important figures in the African-American culture, in the Black community, have been Freemasons and are Freemasons.
Makes a lot of sense now that I am thinking about it. We talked a lot about the Freemasons the last time that we spoke, and I just had you may have heard of David Whitehead. He's been around a while, and him and I talked about the Knights Templar, and I was wondering, where do the Rosicrucians fit in with kind of the Knights Templar, and then you have the Freemasons, and you have this lineage of Egyptian mysticism. Where would you say the Rosicrucians fit into all that?
Well, the original Rosicrucians, because then the Rosicrucians were quickly infiltrated by the Jesuits, as I explained in my latest book. You see, the actual original Rosicrucians born out of that Reformation that was fighting the Catholic Church. There was a big war of religion at the time. Let's not forget when the first manifestos appeared in the early 17th century in Germany. There was this big war of religion that will only end up after probably 20 years after the actual publications of the first Rosicrucian manifesto. So that was the initial stage of the Rosicrucian legacy, which itself is connected to the Templar legacy. So we can say that most Rosicrucian mysticism or the allegorical myth, which goes with it, the history of Christian Rosenkreuz, which is a mythological but mostly a symbolic figure. And I will explain you why, like I did in volume 12. But I also explain this in volume 10 because it connects with the Islamic world. You see, in volume 12, I connected to the Jesuits because the Jesuits were founded by a Basque Spaniard, Ignatius Loyola, Inigo, initially de Loyola, that was his initial name before embracing the name Ignatius. He was born in a contest in which, in the whole Iberic Peninsula, the Inquisition was purging the knowledge and also the connections that led to the Moorish culture that was prevalent and that they wanted to purge out of the Iberic Peninsula to substitute, of course, with the Catholic Christian tradition. And at the same time, they went after the Jewish people who were forced to convert. And so we had the conversos, we had the Marranos. So the Alumbrados, which Ignacio Loyola, the founder of the Jesuits, was part of, were mixing Islamic mysticism with Kabbalah, with Gnosticism, in a context of the Iberic Peninsula, which filtered all that knowledge that was lost from the Middle East. You see, when there was the fall of the Roman Empire, there was also a loss of knowledge. There was the Dark Ages for real in Europe. And so that knowledge that came back and then will be picked up in Italy and formed the basis for the Renaissance was actually filtered from the Iberic Peninsula, because the translations often were from Moorish sources, from Arab sources. And for that reason, I also explain which cultures in the Middle East are connected to this knowledge that was somehow preserved and then refiltered and pushed back into Europe. So we own a debt towards Islam because without them, in fact, we will not have the numbers that we use. We call them commonly Arab numbers. No, they're not the Roman numbers. We don't use, contrary to what is being used, for example, in the number that distinguishes Pope Leo XIV, which is a Roman number. We usually use Arab numbers, which in this case are also a legacy of that knowledge that was that resurfaced somehow. So I would say that it's very important for people when they discuss the Rosicrucian tradition to understand the context in which all this was born. And so this context of knowledge, often forbidden by the Inquisition. In Spain, we had the infamous Spanish Inquisition. I mean, they made Monty Python jokes about it. I mean, it's like one of the most fearless and crude, let's say, is an example of the worst that mankind can put together when you go after your enemy, using at times we would say accusing them of things they have never done, but at the same time, there were, of course, people who were doing black magic. There were witch doctors. There were people involved in witchcraft or black magic, but it wasn't always the case.
Right.
And there was always an instrumental use of the Inquisition. Now, the founder of the Jesuits himself was arrested several times before he will be eventually approved by the Vatican in 1540.
Wow.
And so the experience of the Jesuits was initially of being persecuted. At the time, the whole structure of the Inquisition was born after Dominic Guzman, the founder, who was the founder of the Dominican order. The Dominicans were in charge of the Inquisition. And then, paradoxically, the Jesuits took over the Inquisition, who had persecuted them. And why?
Wow.
Because the Vatican recognized that maybe by having an order knowledgeable and acquainted with all this occult knowledge that was surfacing here and there, they could actually have maybe a better chance also of fighting what was happening, or the heresies that were spreading across Europe. Now, the Gnostics had already been persecuted also at the time with the Knights Templars, the Cathars, the Albigeans, all these Gnostic Christian movements have been persecuted. But the Rosicrucians tended to pick up on that knowledge. And then that knowledge eventually would become one of the major mystery schools involved in the foundation of speculative Freemasonry. So here is for you the answer to your initial question.
It's amazing how it's like a serpent, the way it gets its way through everything, you know, and then
yes, because for example, in volume 10 of my confession, I also explain how the Rosicrucians, together with the Sabbatean Frankists, then in a way also helped the rise of Nazism from the Ottoman Empire.
That's right.
Sanolnico, Rudolf von Simbottendorf, the founding of the Thule Gesellschaft in 1919, the rise of Adolf Hitler, aided by the Thule Society. All this, of course, is connected. So people might separate things, and that's what unfortunately characterizes the great ignorance of this era.
Yes.
We tend to blame one specific race, one specific group of people. In reality, there is on top of the pyramid a structure which is very intricate. And so when I had to read myself many books, I see that maybe the author had a vision that only cleared certain parts, not other parts, while instead my books want to clear the whole structure, 360 degrees. That could only be possible with 12 volumes, which you know are pretty thick.
Yes.
And so you have like all these books, and they are all part of this history, which culminates, like I said, with the Jesuits, because they themselves then went on to infiltrate the Rosicrucians soon after the foundation of the first, let's say, the appearance of the Rosicrucian Manifesto and the foundations of the first Rosicrucian groups within especially the German aristocracy in particular, the Jesuits went to the north of Europe, find their ideal candidate that could become maybe also interested in what they were doing, and that candidate would be Queen Christina of Sweden. She helped she was recruited by Athanasius Kircher. Athanasius Kircher was also, because the Jesuits were teachers by day, secret agents by night. Kind of, that is kind of how things worked out with the Jesuits. So what happened was that they converted the Queen Christina of Sweden, who was actually of the House of Gaza, was a queen of Sweden from 1632 until her abdication in 1654, showing her the great knowledge and what they were doing in Rome. And she left her position as queen, went to Rome, and became then the patron of the circle of Rosicrucians, which gave birth to the Golden Rosicrucian tradition, which then was sent back to Germany a century later and became the way they could infiltrate Freemasonry, and work hand in hand also with the Sabbateans, who Sabbatean Frankists, because they were also doing the same thing. And Sabbatean Frankists, for those who don't know it, is a topic that I touch in the last chapter of this book, a very important topic. Yes. Because today, if we have this mess in the Middle East, it's all because of them.
That's
the
right.
Heretics of the Jewish tradition that developed from Shabbatai Zevi and his heir, Jacob Frank, into the Middle East by collapsing the Ottoman Empire and facilitating the chaos that we have today.
There's a direct lineage, and for those of you who aren't aware of it, that is what you're seeing play out to this day in Palestine, Israel.
Yeah, so, it's very stupid to say, the Zionists, the Khazarians, the this, the that, without really having a knowledge. Why did the Zionists, let's say, rise to some kind of power within the Jewish world? As a reaction to the Sabbatean Frankist heresy. But at the same time, when the World League of the Zionists was established in Switzerland and Theodor Herzl, they were immediately infiltrated. They were nationalists initially, but they were immediately infiltrated by the Sabbatean Frankists to transform them in what is now the labor Zionist reality, which then gave birth to Israel. Right. So Israel has this DNA, which unfortunately it's a DNA that doesn't have much with Orthodox Judaism, to tell you the truth.
No.
But has a lot to do with Jesuitism and with the Sabbatean Frankists that worked along with the Jesuits.
What would you say the most well-known family that falls into that Sabbatean
The Rothschild, of course, are the typical family that everybody knows about. But, the problem is here, also in regards to the Rothschild, to blame only the Rothschild for all the evil of the world, there will be
it's not.
Really like, okay.
It's like blaming Hitler for Nazism, and when Hitler couldn't have made it 2 feet without constantly being sponsored, funded, propped up.
But Hitler himself, like Rabbi Marvin Alterman said, was a product of the Sabbatean Frankist in a ritual that was conducted in 1888, in which he was himself conceived. So,
wow. Speaking of power structures, most people think to this day that the Pope is the top of the pyramid, and you've exposed a much deeper power structure. And
yes, I would say that the Pope is on top of a certain pyramid, but then of course the Black Pope, which is the Jesuit general, controls the Pope, who is known as the White Pope, while instead the Jesuit general is known as the Black Pope. That's why today a lot of people, when they come to me and say, "Oh, but you like, to blame everything on the Jesuits, but you don't talk about the Jews." I'm like, guys, maybe we need to go back into history of the Jesuits themselves, because the Jesuits were founded by a guy who was suspected himself of being a conversus from the Jewish faith. But at the same time, his secretary was Jewish, and the first collaborators who actually inspired the foundation of it. So who were these people? Because here we're talking about something that goes back even earlier than the Sabbatean Frankists. Now we know that within the Jewish tradition there was black magic, because from the moment in which the Erev Rab appeared, which was this class of magicians that follows Moses into the desert in the Exodus, and so they were the one who pushed the golden calf. They were the ones who brought impurity to the Jewish faith. So people who, for example, know all this might finally have a perspective which is honest about everything. There is, let's say, not a single group that has not been infiltrated by what we commonly refer to as the Illuminati, and so they can be Catholics, and then the Jesuits arrive and they constitute the infiltration that brings them to where we are now. We have the Jews who are infiltrated by the Sabbatean Frankists. These are, of course, the most powerful, but then we have the Muslim world. The Muslim world goes back to the great conflict between the Shia faction and the Sunni. But who founded the Shia faction? It was a guy called Saba, who was a Jewish guy.
Oh my God, I didn't
who was
know that.
a member of the Erev Rav. So you see, then you go back to start here. So you have this connection that keeps on reappearing. And for that reason, you see, when it comes to the Rosicrucian, the very birth of the Knights Templars, the Rosicrucians, and the development of speculative Freemasonry somehow is also connected to the Islamic Illuminati, as I explain in volume 10, because the most startling, I would say, aspect of this phenomenon is that the conspiracy theorists in the Muslim world have managed to insinuate themselves into mainstream Arab and Turkish discourse, and they're always blaming the Jews without really acknowledging that in Cairo there was a legacy of Illuminati that goes back thousands of years, because and also the Persian world. I mean, when we talk about the black aristocracy, we talk about, for example, the very roots of the Illuminati. We go to ancient Sumeria. Where was ancient Sumeria? It doesn't really.
Right there.
I mean, ancient Sumeria wasn't in England. It wasn't in Germany. Do these people know where it was? Because maybe they need a history lesson.
Right.
So this is the whole thing. You know, there is a way, let's say, of working following the diktat of dividi et impera, divide and conquer. So divide and conquer is then the way of dividing things and then putting people against each other.
Yep.
When you have, for example, the Knights Templar or the Rosicrucians, or the Freemasons, there is people that still to this day see them as a divided thing. When instead, the Freemasons themselves have built a series of rites in which they struck their members on the Rosicrucian tradition, the Templar tradition, the Assassine tradition, this other, because it's compiling all these mystery schools of old into one.
Yes. Which can be traced back to Egypt and that part of the world.
And again, then we go back to, like I said in volume 9 of my Confessions, the Gnostics, the Gnostics of Alexandria, of Egypt, and then going back to ancient Sumerian times and so on. But then, for example, when it comes down to the Sufis, the first Sufis were Shia within Iran, Iraq. That's where ancient Sumeria was. It's not like Islam appeared and suddenly all these old traditions were scraped off the map. It's a little bit like, I think there has always been a misunderstanding that was, of course, carefully orchestrated by the historians who are in charge in the universities, which are always controlled by the religious institutions, either Muslims or Christians or whatever, who have always omitted the fact that, for example, when Christianity arrived in ancient Rome, it's not like these temples of old, these cults that for thousands of years, when in Rome suddenly gave up everything.
Right.
They integrated within the new religion. The same thing, and I demonstrate this in my book, happened with Islam. Even Muhammad, who himself was very drastic in his position of abandoning Kaaba because it was filled with pagan and going then, you know, and so he was basically he had let's say started his story, you know, in a way in Mecca, but then he had also started his story in a place which was filled by paganism. The pre-Islamic Arabian peninsula there, where you have the development, you know, where basically it was filled by goddesses, worship of Isis, but all also worship of all mother goddesses of all kinds. So Muhammad, the prophet of Islam, was born in Mecca in the year 570, and this was a hotbed of paganism and polytheism. There was no monotheism there.
No.
And so do you really think that even Muhammad didn't have to come up with some kind of compromise in the end?
No, absolutely. It would never work without it. You could never institute that into a society without, grabbing things from the old and just trying to slip it into the, I mean, it's not the way society it would never be accepted. It would never catch.
But then, to preserve that knowledge, often secret society arise within those religions, like, for example, Islam, and then they constitute, like Sufism, for example, started to develop within their own structure a different view of Islam, which was integrating Gnostic elements, pagan elements, let's say. And then this had to be, of course, always done in secret, or the Rosicrucians in the Christian, Catholic, or Protestant world. It had also was also done in secret. The Freemasons developed when we were at the, let's say, speculative Freemasonry, because of course Freemasonry is much older, but speculative Freemasonry developed when the Inquisition was at the last moments of their history before the Age of Enlightenment will be completely eradicating the whole thing in the name of reason. But this is what often we lack from the history lessons when we go to a university. The fact that, this guy arrived in this city, he forced them to convert to Islam, otherwise he would cut their heads, which of course it was true. But then there was, for example, a lot that is not said in all this,
course,
no?
Yeah.
And so maybe there was those, for example, those people who were a little bit more knowledgeable about certain things, who read the Quran and said,
wait a minute.
Okay, but I will adopt certain things and I will not adopt other. But in any case, we will convert it because it's convenient to us not to pay taxes.
Right.
Or
That's right.
Because anybody who wasn't Muslim will have to pay that. Or, for example, in the Christian world, even in Northern Europe, when it comes down to the Viking tradition, the runes, yes, they will convert officially, but these elements will never really disappear from their tradition.
No. I just want to make sure that I heard you right. And maybe this isn't what you were saying, but are you saying that that in part it was a Sabbatean who created the division that is still very prominent and probably the most well-known division of regarding Islam is the Sufi versus Sunni. The fact that there's
that the Sabbateans didn't exist yet. There was the Arab Rav. The Arab Rav, those magicians that were actually of a Jewish faith, who came out with Moses because they saw Moses was very powerful. Moses, we just need to read the Bible, demonstrated his power was superior to any of these magicians that the Pharaoh had in his court. So what happened? Happened that some of them joined Moses, and they infiltrated and became part of the Jewish tradition, and from that moment onwards they almost integrated in the Jewish in the Jewish world in a way that then became part of the Jewish world, but still they retained that those magical practices, that black magic practices from ancient Egypt, and that became the basis in which then Sabbatai Zevi worked to rise his Sabbatean legacy later on. But that happened only in the 17th century. That is many centuries later. Here we're talking about something that goes back to ancient times, to the very moment in which, so when
I was just trying to figure out if it was a deliberate divide and conquer or if it was just a result of the infiltration.
The actual deliberate divide and conquer from in the Jewish world in regards to the Shia tradition, it was, I think that what happened was that definitely this guy who himself started to work and to divide the Muslims between Sunni and this new thing that was born with the fourth caliph, Ali, who was himself one of the warriors, most fierce warriors of Muhammad during the first years of Islam, and then married his daughter, Fatima. But then when, because after the death of Muhammad, there was the first, the Rashidun caliphs were the first caliphs to develop, and they kind of like developed in a way that by the fourth caliph, there was a lot of pressure, and also those pagans who initially didn't accept Islam, when they saw that Islam was working, they wanted to join and create their own caliph.
Sure.
So there was a lot of the pressure. But then it was this developing. I think that what happens is this: that is not. We can't blame a specific race or a specific group of people, but we have to also blame the nature of Islam in the way it developed initially, and from that moment onwards. It became a religion ever so schismatic because they didn't have a central authority. The Roman Empire, when they embraced Christianity and they created the Council of Nicaea, which, by the way, this year we celebrate the 1,700 years since the Council of Nicaea, which was in the year 325. We are basically celebrating this year. That's why the Vatican is working very much with all the Christian churches, because they are using this moment to create a union which will then be used for the one world religion that they are trying to put together. So the first Council of Nicaea, convened in 325 AD, was the first ecumenical council in Christian history. It was called by Emperor Constantine, but Islam didn't have that. Islam didn't have that. Islam didn't have an empire that embraced them. Islam had initially they had to convert a lot of pagan populations, first of all, who were not absolutely neither Christians or Jews. The Christians or Jews were mentioned in the Quran, so they couldn't be persecuted, but they could be simply forced to pay taxes, which was the reason why some Christians and some Jews kind of went into that convert phase for avoiding the, if you don't want to pay tax, I mean, you say, whatever, you're going to 5 times a day, you're going to bow down
it's an easy price to pay.
Okay. So Shia Islam, which is today is the second branch of Islam. Of course, Sunni is the majority. But if we go in the history of Islam, how did they become the majority? Because their empires that they founded became more successful. And because the Vatican from Rome understood that maybe supporting one branch against the other was more convenient, because when they started to expand and become a threat to them, then things changed. And that's where the Crusades then came in. And that's when the Knights Templars were based on what the Christians had seen in the Middle East, what kind of secret society. So let's say that the secret societies that we now call the Rosicrucian, the Knights Templar, the Freemasons, their origins, though, because you have the Rosicrucians that can be separated from the Freemasons altogether. Still to this day, we have Rosicrucians who are not Freemasons, or Knights Templars who are not Freemasons. But in reality, all these secret societies, their inspiration came from Syria, out of all places. The group, for example, like the Ashashins of Hassani Sabah, which was a schismatic group, Shia group, born within the Cairo Lodge, which was this important group of Illuminati in the reign of the Fatimid Empire. Now, the Fatimid Empire was Shia, and it was very powerful. They eventually will disappear. Today, Egypt is Sunni. And Shia instead doesn't have, but still they retain some of that knowledge. So it creates a lot of problems for Christians to understand all these nuances and all these. So that's why I advise you strongly to read this book.
Read the books. Yes.
Read the book. Because, for example, here you have inside this book an image. Now, this image has never been shown to the public before. It's kept in a deposit in Turkey. They refused to put it in a museum because this image was found in the 1950s in a former church of the Knights Templars, and it represents Mohammed on the cross, which was worshipped in secret by the Knights Templars.
Wow.
That was Baphomet. Now, if you go to a Muslim and say Muhammad on the cross, they're going to cut your throat for even saying that.
Offended, yeah.
First of all, in the religion of Islam, you can't even depict Muhammad. You can't paint him. You can't.
You're not allowed, right? Yeah. That's why you don't see.
To even put him on a cross and worship him, it's a complete. But why did this happen? Because they were following a schismatic group like the Assassins that couldn't care less about the mainstream Islam and had built their own thing. So you see, there is a lot of things that bring confusion, let's say, in a way or in another. No, the Shia faith, it's one of them, because like I explained in volume 10, it was prone to schism. And so the Fatimid Empire became very powerful at one point. Imagine the Fatimid Empire at one point owned the Arab Peninsula, the whole, from Mecca to Cairo to Sicily to the south of Italy. I mean, here we're talking about massive empire.
Yeah, you could see why the Crusades, right? That's what instigated the Crusades.
No, but then something happened.
Right.
The Seljuk Turks started to expand, and they will become the base for the biggest and more fierce. And when Saladin arrived, and the Ottoman ideal kind of started to creep in, and then brought to what will eventually manifest with with Istanbul, because Constantinople was the second most important Christian city in the world. Right. Still to this day, one of the most important seats of Orthodox Christianity is paradoxically an Islamic town like Istanbul, because people don't understand that at one point Rome and Istanbul were the two centers, but when the Muslims conquered Istanbul, that became the seat of real power. And the Sunnis, because the Saladin was a Sunni, so he went after, he was really forcing the intervention of the Vatican at that point, who issued the Crusades and made a secret alliance with the Shia.
Wow.
And with the Assassins, where they learned a lot from the Assassins in matters of not only even how they dressed, but even how they fought at war. You see, up until the year 1000 in the Christian tradition, we didn't have any holy wars. We didn't want any holy wars because Jesus himself never said to go and conquer. No. Okay? So who inspired these holy wars? The Muslims. So nowadays, when the Muslims say, the crusade, and in this book, I kind of put a mirror in front of them, and I say, listen, the tradition was picked up from your tradition. So if you never had that tradition in the first place, to consider the Quran the most holy book you had to immolate themselves, you will never have had the Crusades in the first place.
Right. But who really instigated the Crusades? Was it done by the Roman Empire to head off what they saw was an absolute threat to their dominion, or was it a combination of both, religious, ideological, of course
it's never religious, it's always geopolitical interest, So then what the Vatican, when I say Vatican, I say the legacy of ancient Rome. Even if the empire formally didn't exist anymore, the barbarians have brought the Pope to his knees, almost, even if in the end he managed to survive. He was Rome was no longer in charge of its empire. So at that point, things changed very much. But at the same time, Rome then found a new way of controlling millions of people through religion, because it became the seat of the Christian, of the most important place on the planet when it came down to the Christian faith, aside from Jerusalem. So history brought Peter, the disciple number one of Jesus, to go to Rome. Of course, Rome was the capital of the empire. If you want to launch a new faith, a new sect,
you gotta go to Rome. Yeah.
Where do you go? To Rome. If you want to launch it here in America, in theory, you will go to Washington.
DC, nowadays, that's right.
I mean, if we want to I make an example, of course, a stupid maybe example, but you go to the place which represents the country.
Really, the only place you can go to launch something like that.
But also, Rome had a very big tradition when it came to religions. It was capable, since the persecution of Jesus, though, was possible because it was in a context in which it was abroad, it was in Israel, but in Rome, all religions were accepted if you were respectful of the state. So transforming, initially the Christians were persecuted because they were seen as dangerous, as that's why they met in the catacombs, they met under Rome. Rome is a city that basically has an underground city under it, and so they conspired until at one point, though, they emerged victorious as the religion of the empire. Their interest of the Christians wasn't to become one of the many faiths.
No, not at all.
It was to become the faiths that integrated all the others. And that's why Catholicism means universal. It means to integrate all the other faiths. And this, regardless of Jesus and whatever he did 2,000 years ago. So answering to what you said, we can say clearly that we're talking here about a also geopolitical thing. Now, when going back to the Crusaders, they were born out of a concept which reflected the concept of holy war, which was born within the Islamic world, which is the concept of ribat. Ribat refers to the voluntary defense of Islam, in which these ribats were fortified centers. And so when the Vatican, which, like I said, was the seat of power of Christianity, at that point is almost like they branched out of a regular empire. They had more than a regular empire, because wherever they converted a king, they owned the Vatican at that point owned them almost. So then you have, in the centuries following, you will have the development of the Portuguese Empire, the Spanish Empire, and even here in America, where here in the United States, people think, 1776, that was mainly a Protestant endeavor. In my latest book, I demonstrate that it wasn't at all only a Protestant project, because remember one thing, the Jesuits were the number one enemies of the Reformation, of the Church of England, and when they saw an opportunity to fight England, well, they supported that opportunity. So who do you think they supported in the end, George Washington or the king in England?
George Washington, right?
So that's why when eventually America was established, not only they donated the land, the Carroll family, which was a family involved with the Jesuits for many centuries, also with the Catholic Church, the Calvert family that preceded them. But they donated the very land with the Capitol Hill is established on. And they sent a painter from Rome to paint the apotheosis of Washington on the Capitol Hill.
Wow. My God. Some say that the Vatican is falling, and others say it's continuing to evolve into something darker than it is, if that's possible. And, It's 2025. We have Israel being accused of genocide, certainly apartheid. You know, we can argue over the definition of genocide, but it sure
Israel,
seems like they're killing
Israel?
a lot of people.
Because the thing is, people need to understand what is Israel. Israel is a construct of the Rothschild and the Sabbatean Frankists,
That's
who
right.
at one point forced, unfortunately, the Orthodox Jews out of Europe with pogroms, Holocaust, and so
That's right.
on.
People don't know that. People,
people don't know that, and then they blame the Jews. The Jews, poor guys. I mean, the majority of the Jews was not necessarily.
No, they don't. Most of the Jews don't even know.
They don't even. That's the thing. Most of the Jews don't even know what is a Sabbatean Frankist. That's the problem here.
I know. It's wild. It's wild. It's just. I mean, the indoctrination and the complete falsification of most of history. It's just rampant. And so it's like impossible to have a true conversation with people because they just have no idea.
It's very sad, though. Very sad. Let me tell you, it's very sad because blaming, for example, a religion or blaming a race.
Yes. No, I agree.
Okay, I would say that it's more easy to blame a religion than to blame a race because maybe a religion can become corrupt. A faith that infiltrates a race, can become blamable to some extent, especially if that faith is built on the wrong premises.
Right.
But the fact that you are blaming a whole race, for example, like when they say there is this popular conspiracy on the internet, the Khazarians.
Yeah.
The Khazarians the Khazarians existed. They were simply a nation that embraced. They were put through. They were put in a difficult situation. Either they
embraced Judaism. Yeah.
No, either they had to convert to Islam, either they had to convert to Christianity. They said, okay, we convert to Judaism. They converted. They were not Jews, and so there is no Khazar DNA.
Right.
If we go and see those areas which they always usually traditionally blame the Khazars, in reality, Jacob Frank, where was he born? He was born in Ukraine.
That doesn't surprise me at all.
And he bought 20,000 Jews converts to the Catholic as a payment almost, so he could be himself nobilitated. And so you see, going back to the way the structures work, we talk about the Erev Rav, we talk about the establishment of we saw a Muslim leader, for example, like Saladin. Saladin was considered a noble individual, but the Vatican wanted to kill him because he was expanding on Holy Land that they considered their own property, including Gaza, back in the days. So what they did a deal with the Ashashins, who were this group of thugs from the Shia faith that came from the Cairo Lodge. Hassani Sabah had been initiated there and then went all the way on top of a mountain to establish this fortress filled with assassins who became Sicars, became basically paid assassins almost. So the Templars wanted to kill somebody, but they couldn't do it. The Pope couldn't go around killing people with the Knights Templars becoming themselves assassins, killing people in ways that were not, let's say, because also we have to project ourselves back in those days. When you were a knight, you had to follow certain rules of engagement. You had to fight your enemy in front with the sword, the thing, the horse, The Ashashins, they will dress up as a woman or come in the middle of the night like a ninja, slap your throat to poison you. These things were not noble at all. And so they were employed by the Templars to do the dirty work and go and kill Saladin or his representatives. And they killed a lot of his representatives. They never killed Saladin. And Saladin arrived at that point very angry at the Templars had two bases, one in Gaza and one where we have nowadays the Temple Mosque, where basically the second temple was destroyed by the Romans, and then we had the establishment later on of whatever the Islamic people are claiming, or Muhammad going up in the sky, which was all very much a construct, also very much led by geopolitical interest, because Muhammad was already dead for a few years when they claimed that Muhammad suddenly
and they're still using it. It's still being fought over,
No, so it was a construct of geopolitics, that part of the book that was, let's say, almost added in commentary. And in fact, the Quran includes this element of which was probably inserted in a later time. You were talking about 5 years after the Prophet Muhammad died, they arrived in Jerusalem, but he had died. Right. So you can't claim that suddenly Prophet Muhammad in sleep went and arrived in Jerusalem. Where was he? Sleeping from where? From another dimension? So, but they claim that, and that led to the building of what is now considered the second most holy site in Islam, and it's also a very contentious site. Okay, so when we see, for example, the way that Islam picked up on certain elements of the Jewish faith, Solomon, for example, or even the elements of the Christian faith, but even elements of the Gnostics, who claimed that Jesus somehow didn't go on the cross. At the last minute, he was transmigrated into somebody else because it was too holy to go on the cross. That is an element that the Quran picks up from a Gnostic tradition. So this is, in the end, the Templars had two bases. One was there because they arrived in Jerusalem. Where are we going to go? On temple, they were the knights. In fact, they became known as the poor knights of Christ of the Temple of Solomon, because they established themselves on top of the second temple, no? And then they had another castle, another base, which was in Gaza, which was the port, because, of course, from there, you go directly to Messina, Italy, and the rest of Europe. In the pilgrims, you have to protect the pilgrims. So when Saladin arrived to Gaza, and he arrived, who was living in Gaza back then? Let's be very honest, because this also has to be very... Today we see all these people dying, and it's very sad and everything, and they all claim, this is my land, this is my land.
Yeah.
But who was living in Gaza in those days before Saladin arrived? Question mark.
Wasn't it? Weren't they Christians? No,
they were Christians and Jews.
They were Christians and Jews, right?
So they arrived there, and then you see only a limited amount could go inside the castle of the Templars. The other ones got slaughtered by Saladin.
Wow.
So, karmically speaking, I know that this is something that a lot of people find very controversial, and of course it would be like, it's like searching for trouble to actually make a statement like this. No, but guys, Gaza became later on also the most holy city of the Sabbateans, because Nathan of Gaza became almost the St. John the Baptist of Shabbatai Zevi. And when Shabbatai Zevi wasn't recognized as a Messiah by the rest of the Jewish world in Jerusalem, by the Council of Rabbis in Jerusalem, they went to Gaza. So not only it was considered the place of importance back in the... Of course, here we are talking about a place that has been inhabited since the 15th century BC.
Right.
You had the Philistines, which were these ancient people who live in the south coast of Canaan.
Yeah.
And that is one thing. Then you had the connection with the ancient Egyptians.
Right.
Because the ancient Egyptians made it part of a confederation of cities that they retained as cities of importance. But guys, it doesn't, we're talking a long time before Islam ever came to the picture here. Okay, so we have to be very honest about this. Okay, it's their own land, but what kind of land is that? It's not Islam. Okay, then you have the Roman Empire, where you had, of course, it was a port town. It flourished. Right. It became very, no? Then, of course, it was conquered by first the Rashidun army, which was the Rashidun Caliphate of the first four caliphs we talked after Muhammad. Which we saw what happened with the Rashidun Caliph, because after the fourth Caliph, there was this clash, and then it divided completely, and then the Rashidun Caliph lasted only 4 Caliph, because then it couldn't, it went forward, but it wasn't anymore.
Right.
The structure
How long was it conquered?
Mined at the basis by conflicts within the family of the Prophet himself. The moment he dies, he says, okay, this guy is my successor, but then this other guy wants to be my successor. This other guy wants to, these people, they are all very much into power more than religion.
Right. Of course, yeah.
And then at that point, Gaza City was developed, but by the time the Crusaders arrived, Gaza was basically in ruins.
Right.
So they had to reconstruct it. And why was it in ruins? It was in ruins because you had the various problems. The locust swarms destroyed this. People think the locust today, they have this idea, but guys.
No, those were real. That's one of the few things that were, they were
reduced
physical.
It basically to a village almost at one point. These locust swarms was so. But the thing is that in the moment of the Crusades, it became a place, let's say, a strategic place,
right?
Because of course, we're talking about a port. We're talking about a port that is into the Mediterranean. Right. We're talking about a port which, people, the so-called pilgrims,
people don't understand,
pass through there to go into the Holy Land. So it became a contentious place between the Muslims and the Templars. So the Knights Templars, a little known fact about Gaza is that it was a stronghold of the Knights Templars. It's almost like they try to keep this matter not so, just like it's not known that it was the holy city of the Sabbateans, and that where they conducted the most debauchery rituals. Only for that reason, the karma that went on that place is probably the worst karma you can bring with those satanic rituals, because Shabbatai Zevi did everything possible to violate all the rules of Judaism.
Yes.
Eating pork, orgies, magical. The magic sex that we attribute to Alice and Crowley was first performed by people like Shabbatai Zevi,
right,
who married even a prostitute from Italy, from the Jewish community in Livorno, so he could then organize with her a number of orgies and so on. Now, the city of Gaza is always been contentious.
Yes.
Now, the Crusaders, they took this city, and it was important because it was very close to the Fatimid Empire, which was based in Egypt, and which Cairo was the headquarters.
Right.
But like I explained, the Fatimid Empire was made by the Muslim Illuminati, because the Fatimid Empire, already the name gives it, Fatimid. Fatima was the wife of Ali. So they claim they were descended, because all these people then always claim they're descended, especially...
Yeah, they love to do that.
Especially in the Shia tradition, even more than the Sunni, because they claim to be descendants of Muhammad and his many wives, but especially in particular in the Shia tradition is Fatima, that main wife, because she was the wife of Ali, and Ali is the one that they recognize being equal to Muhammad for the Shia. Okay, so there is this, in around 149, the Knights Templars were in charge of this basically city, and they allowed the kingdom of Jerusalem to encircle nearby Ascalon, And Gaza transformed itself in a Templar stronghold. So the fact that it became a Templar stronghold should already make us understand the relevance, the importance. Right. Then in the year 1150 or 53, I think, it fell to the Crusaders completely. So the Templars played a major role also there, and they were kind of taking control. But then you see all this Templar power was challenged by, of course, the expansion of the Seljuk Turks, which eventually, with what became the Ottoman Empire, mined the Byzantine Christian Church at their basis, because Constantinople was, nowadays, we see it after, of course, it's almost been 1,000 years. We have this division between the Orthodox and the Catholics. Right. But at the time, this division wasn't in place. It was simply the Byzantine Christian Church Empire, part of Rome legacy in the East, let's say. Right. And so I would say that that is the thing here, that a lot of people ignore the history. In the year 1170, as I explain in my book here, Saladin, who unified then later, I mean, Saladin was a guy who managed to crack the Shia leadership of Egypt under the Fatimid. And at that point, cracking that meant reducing their influence. If today Shia represents a minority in Islam, it's because also of these battles, of these wars. It's not because people prefer this faith and that faith because they love Ali more than Muhammad, or Muhammad more than Ali. It was because the guys who represented these faiths kicked more ass than the other one.
That's usually the case with the,
so that is basically the case. So at that point, you know, when you have the Knights Templars being so influential, the Knights Templars then became so influential that became almost a threat to that was perceived as a threat by some monarchs, and that's when eventually
they got the call to clear them out.
Yeah, and that left though a vacuum, a big vacuum in the Catholic Church that was filled only by the Jesuits once they were accepted in 1540, because there were no longer military religious orders of priests. Yes, you had what we now, the Knights of the Holy Sepulchre. You had the knighthoods that survived, like the Knights, the Teutonic Knights, that were very important during the Crusades, and they survived, but they were not religious in a way that could, they were always perceived as a threat because they were outwards, they had too much of a military identity. So when the Jesuits came around, they will still have, let's say, a almost military, I mean, it's clear, if you have the head as a general, the structure is pretty militaristic, but they were not going around with swords or weapons or things. They were going around like almost innocent priests that you could, oh, well, it's just a priest. He's actually a teacher. He's teaching us. He's such a missionary. He's such a good guy.
Wolf in sheep's clothing.
So deception came when the Jesuits embraced education as their Trojan horse to take over the world, literally in every. And I'm not saying also, only the Western world, because the first missionaries were sent to China, India, Japan. We are talking about South America. We are talking about a world which is this world, that still to this day has this Jesuit legacy.
Yeah, huge. I mean, probably, if not the most powerful organization, I think, on the planet to this day. The Jesuit organization is, I mean, it's massive in its scale, and it's, my God, it's still, I want to take advantage of the last kind of 10, 15 minutes we have, Leo, and I want to jump ahead to some of the more modern challenges that our society is facing. Speaking of AI, and then we can, of course, then Elon and his neural, that starts to come up. And
the biggest, I mean, you know that I have written a trilogy based on Cyber Satan, which has been for the last few years the way I have identified the rise of the AI. And the fact that now they're starting to talk about rogue AI, the danger of the AI. I've been saying that for years, and actually I've not been saying it. I've been writing it on my books. In fact, I've a trilogy, volume 6.66, volume 7, and volume 9. Now, these 3 books, which constitute the trilogy of Cyber Satan within my Confessions of an Illuminati, explain how the very concept of the AI is not simply an algorithm, but is rather something that is being given to us by the demonic in order to entrap us in a digital prison, which is becoming more obvious every day. And when you have, for example, this so-called Big Beautiful Bill, I've stated before everybody else a week or so, as soon as I went through the whole thing, I noticed that there was this provision that made it possible to not monitor and control the development of AI for the next 10 years. That is unacceptable, because here we are talking about the experts of the AI who are telling us already at the end of March of this year that if we don't stop the development and pause everything and start controlling every single step, we're going to lose. Because once the AI goes rogue, they're going to go after the humankind. They're going to use robotics to destroy humanity, control humanity in every way possible, diminishing his influence until they will be extinct. So, yes, it's true that up until now, there has always been a talk about technocracy as a limited group of people that can maybe control all this. And that is what is simply happening here. But at the same time, that limited group of people might even risk itself to be extinguished, because the AI doesn't tolerate imperfection, and they see the human being as an object of imperfection in their perfect creation. And in my book, volume 7, I also presented something that I developed in volume 9, the fact that this is the product of reverse engineering. This is a trap. Because, and there will be more to it in a future book that I'm writing, which is not part of the Confessions. Like I said, the Confessions ends with volume 12, but there will be other books, and a specific book which is in the works now and will be probably ready by the end of this year or early next year. I will reveal certain other elements about the fact that we are indeed in front of a development which we are viewing, of course, as simply a scientific development, as an embracing the last stage of modernism. But in reality, it has some very important religious implications. In fact, in volume 12 of my Confessions, I end up the last chapter talking about the interest the Vatican has had in this. And of course, it was confirmed by even by the name of this Pope, who himself, the day after he was elected, when he talked with the cardinals, he explained that this name was chosen because Pope Leo XIII was facing the Industrial Revolution. He instead is facing the AI revolution, and the revolution of the AI includes robotics. When we see that Amazon is about to unleash on us an army of robots to deliver our packages, this is only the beginning. And in 10 years from now, there will be a minority of humans who will be considered, let's say, that will be considered
useful,
usable by the system, because then the system will be like saying, what are you offering to us? What kind of parasite?
We can do anything. You can do a lot more efficiently.
What kind of parasite are you? Are you gonna still simply eat, drink, and go to the toilet? We don't need that.
Right. No.
That is really something that's why the conflict that is becoming simply theater between Musk, Trump, and all that. It's hiding instead the real problem here. Why is Musk not talking about the AI element within the big beautiful bill?
Not even a mention.
So that is the reason. That is the reason here. It's like big theater, big clash of titans, but
yeah.
No, there is something else that needs to be done here, and we need to address that as soon as possible.
I agree. What does it tell you? Do you think people like Bill Gates are conscious of the? I mean, on some level, they have to. He has to be. He's not a fool. But he just bought, I think, 25,000 acres in Arizona to build a smart city from scratch. And, like you've described
smart
it as part of
everything smart,
the
like
system,
I said in my book, is simply smart is Satan. It's like, you have a smart home, is a Satan home. You have a smart phone, is a Satan phone. You have a smart car, is a Satan car, because all these things will be controlled by the AI, and you will have no freedom once the AI decides on your whereabouts. So today you can go here. Today you can't go here.
But what do people like Gates? What do they imagine their children are going to be? What kind of life are they're going to have? Like, can they just not think farther than the instructions they're given?
I mean, you have to understand that these people, of course, imagine themselves almost as a feudal elite of the future. So they don't have a problem. They are the ones who will be driving the quantum computer race and controlling it. So from their own, they buy a lot of land, like you said. They have a lot of... Gates, by the way, has stated that he will give a lot of his money to Africa, for example. And,
he always says shit like that.
Yes, stuff like that.
He's always giving all his money away, and he's still always the top 5 richest person in the world. I'm like, how does that work?
In any case, in the end, the truth is that these families within, they become part of the elite, and that elite is probably already organizing itself for. I mean, remember the possibility that was announced by the Georgia Guidestones that were deliberately destroyed within the pandemic to not show too much to the rest of the world for the next few years. There is no more, Georgia Guidestones, so there is no more evidence of what is their plan. Because yes, it's true that everybody in the conspiracy world has witnessed this and has gone and filmed them and has delivered, but now that they're not any longer in public sight, people tend to forget. People have, a very limited, memory span. And I think that the legacy of this Georgia Guidestone is in their 500 million concept. The human race doesn't have to exceed a certain...
That's what they want.
And that's what they want. And of course, they have realized that with the pandemic, with the vaccines, with everything else.
The world absolutely has a lot of darkness, but I want to remind everyone listening that darkness is not even possible without light. And I want to end on a hopeful note with you, Leo, and for people who may have just listened to this and are feeling a little overwhelmed, maybe manipulated, or downtrodden in what is often perceived as...
I hope to always be there. Because, I understand that the next few decades might be a nightmare of sorts, especially for people who have not given themselves the right priorities in life.
Right. Agreed. Yeah.
So, first of all, understanding what are your priorities within your family unit, and are you capable of going off the grid? Are you capable of living in a certain way if there is the collapse of this civilization? I mean, these are things that I've also addressed in volume 7 and volume 9 of my Confessions in particular. The mentality of today is simply to, as the system is moving forward and pushing us in more and more debt, crisis, inflation, and so on, is simply to go from one bill to the other. And when you go from one bill to the other and you don't really reason about the future of mankind at that point, or the future of your own family, or the future of your own children,
right,
that's very sad. So you need to, first of all, make a priority to actually think out of the box and think out of the restrictions that seem to be pushed on you every day. I know it's not easy. I know it's absolutely not easy.
No, it's not, but it's a great point you make, and people should start to consider and think about that, because, we don't know what's around the corner, but we do know that the more we can stick together and form communities and have the right priorities and be ready for the right things, the finer we're going to be if and when the shit hits the fan.
The actual concept of the 12 books of Illuminati Confessions is simply to put forward what generated all this from the very start. We start from volume 1, explaining how these mystery schools formed the nucleus of what we commonly refer to as the Illuminati, the Freemasons, the Rosicrucians, how they evolved, how some became perverted, other not. Then we go into the most extraordinary moment, which is the moment which preceded the year 2020. In fact, in volume 2, I announced, it came out 5 years before the pandemic, but I announced what will happen with the pandemic, being locked up and all that. So that was an anticipation. And then you have the struggle of the various factions within this new world order. We go through volume 3, in which I show how the Vatican operates with these knighthoods, the legacy of the Knights Templars, the espionage of the Jesuits, how the church was hijacked. Then you go even forward, because then you want to see what's going on. And so volume 4 shows how this reality that comes for the last 500 years, from the times of John Dee till now, developed. And then you go into the decline of our society in volume 5. But still teaching you step by step also the traditions in a way that is, at times for some people, it can be confusing. But then you have to understand that these books are books that are manuals, not only essays or biographies. And then you go into volume 6 and you go into the presentation of the cyber set. It came out in early 2019. The one world religion, which is coming together, because ultimately, yes, it's true, we will have cyber Satan, but we will also have a one world religion which will worship technology and cyber Satan, who will become, the AI chatbot will become your priest that will convert you to the one world religion. And then you go into the occult truths of the Great Reset, volume 7, the way that reverse engineering and these alien, allegedly alien spacecrafts, UFOs, was actually a trap. And then, of course, volume 8, which explains how this propaganda machine in the last 120 years has developed, from Hollywood to the music business, from the cinema to everything in the entertainment, how this has been used to control mankind. And then eventually in volume 9, you are revealed further steps into acknowledging that actually this Illuminati existed much, they existed, of course, even they manifested as the Gnostics, for example, and that the Gnostics, they were never really Christian in the traditional sense. They were simply using Christianity, symbols of Christianity and Christianity to vehicle their own message. And then you arrive, of course, to Islam, which is a very important part of the equation, because it's important to understand for us here in the West, this very big and important, massive religion, how it arrived to us, and how it's also fractured with many schools of thought, all though are controlled by the same people. So, and then of course we arrive to the mind control subject, which is from huge. Sun Tzu. And Sun Tzu, though, as I explained in volume 12, the Art of War was translated by a Jesuit in 1772. The year before the Jesuits were officially suppressed by the Vatican, and became a great tool in the hand of somebody called Napoleon. Then we have, of course, the Jesuits, which eventually are the ones that are behind everything in the last 500 years, and have managed to understand all the things that we have said in the first 11 books, and at that point they have made them their own. And they have made them not only their own, but they have managed to establish here in America 40 educational institutions that are preparing the elite and people to embrace their ideas, which are the ideas that we are trying to fight, meaning transgenderism, meaning the immigration, open borders, so they can actually change the landscape politically, but also religiously, because if you let in millions of Catholics, of course, this becomes a Catholic nation. And those Catholics are very gullible, because they come from countries like South or Central America, which are traditionally territories ruled by the Jesuits in a very fierce and very strong way, and not very democratic, to say the least.
No, that's safe to say.
So I think that this is today, for your show, we have really managed, and I want to thank you because I've been able to explain the whole concept of my Confession of Illuminati series, and also explain the importance of it, because, like I said from the very start of it, the truth should set you free, and these books will stay as a legacy even after we are long departed from this earth. There will be probably people who at that point are a minority, maybe, in a civilization that has collapsed, but they are rebuilding the next stage of our civilization.
Exactly. And this kind of information is going to be so important to them, to build it the right way and not let what happened again.
Absolutely.
But Leo, I want you to tell everyone, Leo has a YouTube channel. He's got an awesome website. He's always putting out videos, information, his books, as you just heard, incredible resources, very vetted, sourced, it's just, they're not even theoretical. They're based on history. And that's what I love about Leo and his work. Leo, I appreciate your time. And tell everyone where to find you.
Of course, we could speculate and start talking about things that are matters of speculation. And I love doing that in my private, day-to-day, with maybe colleagues or people. But, for me, my books need to be based on facts, because otherwise the people who
you can't be right about the Jesuits and not
them will have an easy, they will say simply, I have a great respect for people like David Icke, but David Icke, with this whole reptilian theory thing,
but that's one part of it, a lot of his work,
I know, but the people who
they just attack
to debunk the rest of his, they go after that. So I didn't want to do that in my books.
No, I don't blame you.
Don't talk about theories. It's not conspiracy theory, but it's conspiracy facts.
Yes, I agree. So, Leo, tell everyone your website and your YouTube channel and where else they can follow you and find you.
Yes, you can find me, of course, at leozagami.com with all my latest articles, the links to my latest books. Otherwise, you can go on Amazon, of course, Confessions of an Illuminati, but you have also other books that I have written, like Pope Francis the Last Pope or Invisible Master. I would suggest, though, to start actually from this book rather
12,
than start
right?
from volume 1, because in a way, this book can be read even without reading all the others.
Right.
But in a way, you can go down the ladder and have, through starting from this book, maybe a better understanding even, because otherwise you might start from volume 1 and be a little bit confused by all these names,
right.
Instead, let's start from the people who control everything and then go deep into their hellish hole until we can bring this light into the cave, because it is a cave. It is a cave that we need to get the people to understand in order to come out of it.
I agree. And that's why I do what I do. And I know that's why you do what you do. And I appreciate your time, Leo, very much. And for everyone listening, thank you for tuning in. And if you're listening on YouTube, don't forget to hit the subscribe button. Check out Leo's YouTube
you can
channel
find me,
as well.
Of course, the Leo Zagami Show is broadcast on YouTube, on Rumble, on X, on Band of Video, BitChute. I have survived the pandemic, which unfortunately censored and removed a lot of my YouTube channels, but I insisted in my presence. And now, fortunately, in the Trump era, we have a lot less censorship, and they have even given back a couple of channels. But in any case, you can find us on the internet, and what I do is also with a series which I've developed during the whole course of 2023. I did Exploring the Illuminati, 50 episodes, in which I really dwell deep into every single esoteric and occult element of what we commonly refer to as the Illuminati. And this series is available also on YouTube.
Nice. Amazing. If you're listening on Spotify or iTunes and you enjoyed this podcast and this wealth of information, please write us a review, give us 5 stars. I'm sure Leo knows this as well. Some of the subject matter we bring you is algorithmically challenged. So we need all the help we can get.
Things are getting better, but I don't know for how long. Let's see. Let's see.
We'll see. Share this video, though, everywhere you can. And thank you so much for tuning in. Leo, thank you, brother.
God bless you. And don't be a stranger. And,
no, I won't be. I won't be. We won't let this much time go by until we do it again.
In 2 years' time.
Okay.
Take care. All the best.
You too, brother. Thank you so much.